History's full of eccentrics, trying to innovate, creating, breaking the mold, as it were. And sometimes those innovations are very bold and straight-up genius. These individuals wind up creating the next biggest thing, adding new tools for humanity to use, and our growing understanding of what is possible. But, naturally, any kind of experimentation is always going to be mixed with a significant amount of failure. And one person from history who is quite sadly, in fact, associated with failure is one Franz Reichelt, sometimes referred to as Francois Reichelt, who, on February 4th, 1912, sadly died at the age of 33 when he jumped from the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France, in order to test his newest design for a wearable parachute. Even to this very day, clickbait articles will often smear him as a complete moron. And while what he did was alarmingly irresponsible, insulting the man seems a little unfair given the actual history of his life. The first bit of misinformation regarding Mr. Reichelt is that he was French, and while that's technically true in terms of his citizenship, when he died, he was not born in France at all. He was born in the Kingdom of Bohemia in Austria-Hungary, in an area that is actually now part of the Czech Republic, on October 16, 1878. He would move to Paris, France, however, at the age of 20 in 1898, and he would obtain French nationality in 1909. So many people do refer to him as a French inventor, but he was Austro-Hungarian born, so it's whatever. Additionally, when he obtained French nationality, he changed his first name from France to Francois, which is indeed the French equivalent of the Germanic Franz. Much of his life prior to his career as a tailor and inventor is shrouded in conflicting reports. It's known he had some sisters, but it's not clear whether any of them ever left Austria-Hungary. Newspaper reports of the time differ on those details. What we do know is that Reichelt was not married, and he had an apartment in Paris in 1907, and he wound up opening what would become a quite successful dressmaking business. He was a genuinely good tailor, very skilled when it came to working with fabrics. He catered mostly to Austrians that were coming on trips to Paris, since, well, being born in Austria-Hungary, he was quite familiar with what kind of designs they would be interested in. But Reichelt wasn't really content in just being a humble tailor, and wanted to make a name for himself as an inventor. Starting in July of 1910, he began working on a parachute suit, a design that would not be much more bulky than one normally worn by an aviator, but with the added benefit of being a parachute. Planes were still very new at the time, and innovation in that field was taking off, quite literally. But the thing about testing new aircraft designs is that it could be very dangerous, especially in those days. There was a lot we still didn't quite understand about aerodynamics, and if something went wrong in the air, well, they didn't have functional parachutes. Many pilots were sadly killed testing out new airplanes. Reichelt felt that a suit they could wear that could also function as a parachute would save lives. So he had really good intentions with what he was trying to achieve. And it wasn't that parachutes didn't exist, it's just that they weren't in a form that could be utilized when it came to flying a plane. The first witnessed test of a parachute is credited with another French inventor, actually. Louis-Sébastien Lenormand wound up jumping from the tower of the Montpellier Observatory in front of a crowd, using a 14-foot parachute that had a rigid wooden frame. It worked, but it was rigid, so it couldn't exactly be folded up or used in a backpack as we would use parachutes now. Further development was done later by another French inventor, André Jacques Garnerin, who had developed a frameless parachute that was suitable for use from high altitudes. But that parachute didn't unfold as someone fell. Just like the rigid frame one, it had to be opened before the jump, and that made it a lot more difficult to actually utilize in an airplane setting. Basically impossible, honestly, especially in a situation where all you really had time for was to jump out. That's why Reichelt was so focused on the idea of wearing it as a suit. If it was a suit, you'd already have it on, and therefore didn't have to worry about finding it and unfolding it and everything involved when it came to the other designs. And to be fair, if you want to get technical, modern parachutes are wearable. They're just in backpack form. So Reichelt was on the right track in terms of how this could work. And no one's keen to mention this, but a lot of his early testing was actually successful. He used dummies that were equipped with foldable silk wings that did seem to allow them to touch down very lightly when they were dropped from at least 5 floors up. But there was a great deal of difference between the prototypes and the wearable version that Reichelt envisioned, and once he started trying to do that, that's where he started running into significant trouble. When he presented his design to the then leading aeronautic organization, La Ligue Aérienne, at the Aero Club de France, they told him to give up on it, that the canopy was too weak and it would never work. Reichelt was not dissuaded by their words, and continued to conduct experiments, dropping dummies from the roof of his apartment. But none of those tests with the wearable version were actually successful. By 1911, however, aviators were interested in a functional parachute design. One individual, Colonel Lalance, offered a prize of 10,000 francs, which was double the prize he had offered a year before. They really wanted this because they were sick and tired of watching people die. The competition was open for 3 years, but did have at least one requirement. The parachute could weigh no more than 25 kilograms. That's 55 pounds. And that resulted in Reichelt refining his design further to reduce the weight, while increasing the surface area, to try to make it actually, well, work as well. But even with these refinements, tests were still unsuccessful. The dummies fell very heavy to the ground, which was not the intention at all. Allegedly, the Eiffel Tower jump was not the first time he had tested his design on himself. In 1911, he apparently jumped from a height of 8 to 10 meters, that's 26 to 33 feet, at Joinville. That was also a failure, but he survived without injury due to falling in a pile of straw. Another newspaper reported that he did this again at Nogent from a height of 8 meters, or 26 feet, and that resulted in a broken leg, because it still didn't work. And it was alleged that he'd also tried it on the Eiffel Tower in 1911, but he only used dummies then. But one of his close friends insisted that that wasn't the case, as he had been trying for at least a year to get permission to conduct a test from the tower, and had only just received authorization for what would be his final test. Other individuals had received permission to test certain things from the tower prior to Reichelt, so that could be where that misinformation is coming from. Either way, though, he was given permission to conduct a test from the tower in February of 1912. And in order to attract further investment in his design, he told the press about his intention to do this, and they were keen to be there. Aviation tech was all the rage at the time, and journalists were clamoring to get the first scoop in what could be the latest and greatest thing in the technology. However, it's important to mention at this point that Reichelt gained permission to do the test with the understanding that this would be a test with a dummy. He wouldn't be jumping himself. That's at least what the authorities thought. That's what they thought that he thought. That was the understanding between them. That is not what happened that day. It was a Sunday, February 4th, 1912, at 7 a.m. in the morning. He arrived at the Eiffel Tower by car with 2 of his friends, and he was already wearing his parachute suit. The press actually heralded the design, as when folded up, it was only a little bulkier than typical flight suits. It was something that people felt could be worn by an aviator. Details regarding the suit are all over the place because the press just wrote whatever they wanted. It was claimed by one newspaper that it may have weighed as little as 9 kilograms, or only 20 pounds, and that the final surface area of the canopy would be about 30 square meters, or 320 square feet, which on paper sounds like it should be enough to support someone's weight and let them fall to earth without dying horribly. That morning was very cold. It was freezing, quite literally, and the ground was frozen as well. Police were on site to maintain order. From the moment he showed up at the tower, he made it abundantly clear that he intended to jump himself. So quite why the police allowed him to go up knowing that, I'm not really sure. and his friends that were with him tried to dissuade him from actually doing this. They felt there was really no reason to test a completely unproven design on himself. Just use the dummies, man. If it worked, you could do it with yourself. It'd be fine. But Reichelt desperately wanted to make a show of things, and the only way he could do that is with an act of sheer bravery and unspeakable, undaunted confidence in his particular design. The pride before the fall, if you will. As he put it in an interview just before the jump, "I want to try the experiment myself, and without trickery, as I intend to prove the worth of my invention." When some potential flaws in his design were pointed out, and the fact that even if it worked well, the parachute would need more time to open than the few seconds he would get from only falling from the very first platform of the tower, Reichelt said, "You are going to see how my 72 kilos and my parachute will give your arguments the most decisive of denials." Oh no. Ropes had been suspended around the area where Reichelt planned to land, and he did spend some time discussing the arrangements with marshals and ensuring that there was sufficient space before going to the stairs to climb to the first platform of the Eiffel Tower. And according to at least one news source, his initial attempt to ascend was actually blocked by a guard named Gassion, who had witnessed previous unsuccessful dummy drops and felt that Reichelt's attempt would end in disaster. It's not known how true that was, since Reichelt himself hadn't done any dummy tests on the Eiffel Tower, according to his friends. Maybe the guard was referring to other inventions, or the press completely made this up. It's hard to say. He got up to the platform regardless, with his two friends and a cinematographer who came to actually film the test. This jump was caught on film, and you may have seen it around the internet. Pretty much every article I know of does share it. I'm not doing it here, because I got a thing about just showing someone dying. And spoiler, Reichelt's jump does not go well. You can find the footage in other places if you want. I'm just not gonna put it in this video because it's literally footage of a man falling to his death. At 8:22 a.m., as a crowd of about 30 journalists and other assorted onlookers watched, Reichelt jumped off of the first deck of the Eiffel Tower, which was about 57 meters, 187 feet above the ground. His parachute, which appeared to only be half open, wound up wrapping itself around him rather than catching the air. He fell for only a few seconds before slamming into the frozen soil below. Death seems to have been instantaneous for poor Reichelt. His right leg and arm were apparently crushed, and his skull and spine were broken. Weirdly, a later autopsy concluded that he'd actually died of a heart attack during the fall, but, okay, look, I'm not a doctor, but that seems really unlikely to me. He only fell for like 5 seconds, and heart attacks usually take longer to kill you than that. I'm pretty sure it was the broken skull and spine that did him in from slamming into the frozen earth. The aftermath of the incident painted Reichelt as a bit of a moron, which is unfortunate. Journalists all over the place wrote stories about the mad genius that had jumped from the Eiffel Tower, foolishly believing his invention would work, and yet it did not. But the reality was, he was just desperate to make a name for himself, and he really did have genuine confidence in his parachute design, despite the fact that previous tests had showed it to be a little not so great. An act of sheer boldness, had this worked, would have been applauded, but because it failed, he gets mocked. For over a century, too. Even today articles are written about him, painting him as a complete moron. I admit, what he did was foolish, definitely. He should have played it safe. But I'm also not gonna spit on the grave of a guy who really did seem to have an inquisitive mind, was trying to make something that would help save lives, and whose folly only resulted in getting himself killed. He didn't hurt anybody else. The powers that be were a lot more wary of granting permission to do parachute tests, particularly from the Eiffel Tower, though it also happened elsewhere. They didn't want to risk something like this happening again, and they also started making it abundantly clear when they did authorize these tests that you are using a dummy. You are not doing this with yourself. Seriously. because the police were heavily scrutinized by the press after the fact because they were asked if they had known that he was gonna jump himself. They insisted that they did not know he was gonna do that, but they definitely knew it on the day and could have stopped him then. The officers on site just didn't. So they could have been just trying to save face. Either way, they were a lot more careful about it in the future. Reichelt did wind up going down in history, just not in the way I think he would have wanted to. Instead of being known for inventing the first functional parachute, he's known for creating one of the most disastrous failures in parachute design. Not really the legacy anyone usually wants to leave behind. Rest in peace, you absolute madman. And with that, a special thank you goes out to all my underwater train finders, SomeDude267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Pencer Kitsune 131-232, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Anzac A1 Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson's Ruro Videos, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Lord Hawk 444, That Guy with a Beard, Mark Holding, Murder Drone Stall, 8Person723, DM Trouble Typhoon, Alfonso Lapuche, Royal Hazard 2860, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matthew Wolf, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy, Matt Weaver, Alderic Jaspers, Tom Redlion, NS Productions 8104, Hannah Bird, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, Dr. Racer 78, The Baxter, and Caleb Crosswhite. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.